Some secrets are buried so deep that even love cannot reach them. Marcus Chun had built his fortune on reading people, on seeing through their masks, and understanding their true intentions. But blindness had stolen that power from him, leaving him vulnerable in ways he never imagined. When a mysterious young woman appeared at his estate claiming she could restore his sight, he thought it was just another scam. He had no idea that her touch would not only open his eyes, but reveal a betrayal so devastating it would shatter everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the woman he was about to marry. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the architect of your downfall? What price would you pay to see again? And what would you do when that sight reveals the one truth you were never meant to discover? This is the story of a man who gained his vision only to lose his faith in humanity, and a girl whose mysterious gift came with a burden that would change both their lives forever. Marcus Chun stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his fingers tracing the cool glass as he listened to the sounds of the city 40 floors below. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who had lost his sight still gravitated toward windows, still sought the warmth of sunlight on his face. 3 months had passed since the accident that had stolen his vision, and he was still learning to navigate a world that had suddenly become foreign to him. The construction accident had happened on what should have been a routine site inspection. Marcus had built his empire on being hands-on, on seeing every detail of his developments with his own eyes. Chun Development Corporation had risen from a small family construction business to one of the most successful real estate companies on the West Coast, and Marcus attributed that success to his unwavering attention to detail. He never trusted others to see what he needed to see. That Tuesday morning in October had started like any other. Marcus had arrived at the Meridian Tower construction site at dawn, his usual time. The 50-story luxury residential building was his most ambitious project yet, a testament to his vision of modern urban living. He had been walking through the lobby area, discussing marble selections with his foreman when the accident happened. A crane operator, later discovered to have been working double shifts for 3 days straight, had miscalculated a load of steel beams. The massive beams had swung wide, crashing through the temporary safety barriers and sending a shower of concrete and debris cascading down. Marcus had heard the sound first, a groaning of metal that made his blood run cold. He had turned to run, but a chunk of concrete the size of a basketball had struck him directly in the face. The doctors at San Francisco General had worked for 18 hours to save his life. His skull had been fractured in 3 places, his jaw broken, and his face required extensive reconstructive surgery. But the most devastating injury was to his optic nerves. The impact had caused severe trauma that left him completely blind. The doctors had used words like catastrophic damage and irreversible, but Marcus had refused to accept their prognosis. He had spent the first month in the hospital, undergoing surgery after surgery. His fiancée, Victoria Sterling, had been by his side through it all. Victoria was everything Marcus had thought he wanted in a partner. She was beautiful, with platinum blonde hair and striking blue eyes that had captivated him from their first meeting at a charity gala 2 years earlier. She came from old San Francisco money, her family's shipping fortune dating back to the gold rush era. More importantly, she understood his world of high-stakes business and social obligations. Victoria had been the perfect companion for a man of Marcus's stature. She spoke 4 languages fluently, had studied art history at Yale, and could discuss wine with the sommelier at the most exclusive restaurants in the city. When they appeared together at social events, they looked like the golden couple that graced the covers of society magazines. Marcus had proposed to her just 2 weeks before the accident, presenting her with a 10-carat diamond ring that had cost more than most people's houses. During those dark days in the hospital, Victoria had been his anchor. She had read to him from business journals, kept him updated on company matters, and assured him that their wedding plans would continue as scheduled. Her devotion had touched him deeply. Many wealthy men had cautioned him about women who might be attracted to his fortune, but Victoria's family had money of their own. Her loyalty during his most vulnerable time had only confirmed what he already believed, that she loved him for who he was, not what he had. When Marcus was finally released from the hospital, Victoria had insisted he move into her Pacific Heights mansion temporarily. The Victorian-era estate had been in her family for over a century, and she argued that it would be easier for him to navigate during his recovery than his modern downtown penthouse, with its minimalist design and sharp corners. The Sterling mansion was filled with heavy furniture and thick carpets that would cushion any falls, and Victoria had even hired a live-in nurse to assist with his care. Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell was a stern woman in her 60s who had been caring for the blind for over 30 years. She had worked with war veterans, accident victims, and those born without sight. Within days of her arrival, she had established routines that would help Marcus begin to adapt to his new reality. She taught him to use a white cane, showed him how to organize his belongings so he could find them independently, and began the long process of teaching him to read Braille. But Marcus resisted every lesson. He refused to accept that his blindness was permanent. He had built his fortune on the belief that any problem could be solved with enough money and determination. He had overcome poverty, discrimination, and fierce competition to build his empire. Blindness was just another obstacle to conquer. He spent his days on the phone with the world's leading ophthalmologists, seeking second and third opinions. He flew specialists in from Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and even experimental programs in Switzerland and Japan. Each consultation ended the same way. The damage to his optic nerves was too extensive. Current medical technology could not restore his sight. The words that haunted him most came from Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, who was considered the world's leading expert in traumatic eye injuries. Mr. Chun, she had said gently during a video call from her office at Harvard Medical School, I understand your determination to explore every option, but I must be direct with you. The trauma you suffered was unprecedented. Both optic nerves were severed completely. Even if we could somehow reconnect them, which is currently impossible, the damage to the visual cortex of your brain means that sight restoration is simply not achievable with any known medical intervention. Marcus had thanked her and ended the call, but her words had felt like a death sentence. He had always been a visual person. He could remember exact details of buildings he had seen years earlier, could spot a flaw in architectural plans that others might miss, could assess the quality of materials with just a glance. His success had been built on his ability to see opportunity where others saw only empty lots or rundown buildings. The emotional toll was devastating, but Marcus tried to hide it from everyone around him. He had always been a private person, preferring to solve his problems internally rather than burden others with his struggles. But Victoria seemed to sense his despair. She began suggesting activities they could do together that didn't require sight. She read to him every evening, describing movies they watched together, and even attempted to guide him through his favorite hiking trails in Marin County. The business began to suffer despite his attempts to continue leading the company through conference calls and meetings. His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had been with the company for 8 years and knew his methods better than anyone. She tried to be his eyes during site visits, describing what she saw in minute detail, but Marcus could sense that important details were being missed. Subcontractors were taking advantage of his absence, construction schedules were slipping, and several major deals fell through when clients lost confidence in the company's leadership. The board of directors, led by his longtime partner David Kim, began pressuring Marcus to step back and allow them to manage day-to-day operations. David had been with the company since its early days and was like a brother to Marcus, but even he was struggling to fill the void left by Marcus's absence. The company had always been built around Marcus's vision and hands-on leadership style. Without him actively involved, it was losing its competitive edge. Victoria tried to encourage him to consider selling the company and focusing on his recovery, but the thought of giving up his life's work was unbearable to Marcus. Chun Development Corporation wasn't just a business to him. It was his legacy, his contribution to the world. Every building that bore his company's name was a testament to his journey from a poor immigrant family to one of the most successful developers in the country. His parents had come to America from Taiwan with nothing but determination and a willingness to work 18-hour days. His father had worked in restaurant kitchens while his mother cleaned houses, both of them sacrificing everything so their son could have opportunities they never had. Marcus had earned a full scholarship to UC Berkeley, where he studied business and architecture. He had started Chun development with a loan against his parents' small house, and every early success had been reinvested into larger and more ambitious projects. The thought of losing all of that because of a random accident was almost too much to bear. Marcus found himself retreating into isolation, spending hours alone in the mansion's library, surrounded by thousands of books he could no longer read. The irony of being surrounded by knowledge he could no longer access only deepened his depression. Victoria began spending more time away from the house, claiming she was handling wedding preparations and family obligations. Marcus didn't question her absences. He was grateful for the solitude that allowed him to grieve without having to maintain a facade of strength. Mrs. Hartwell continued her patient attempts to teach him independent skills, but Marcus remained resistant to her lessons. It was during one of these dark periods that Marcus first heard about Dr. Maria Santos. Jennifer had mentioned her during one of their business calls, saying she had read an article about a researcher in Los Angeles who was working on experimental treatments for optic nerve damage. Marcus had dismissed it initially, having grown tired of false hopes and miracle cures that led nowhere. But desperation has a way of making even the most skeptical person grasp at straws. Late one night, unable to sleep, Marcus had Jennifer research Dr. Santos more thoroughly. What she found was intriguing. Dr. Santos was a neurobiologist who had been working on nerve regeneration techniques using stem cell therapy combined with electrical stimulation. Her work was still experimental, but she had achieved limited success in restoring partial vision to patients with optic nerve damage. 2 weeks before Marcus was scheduled to fly back to Los Angeles for the experimental surgery, everything changed with the arrival of an unexpected visitor. It was a foggy Thursday morning when Mrs. Hartwell answered the door to find a young woman standing on the mansion's front steps. The girl appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair and unusual violet-colored eyes that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a worn leather jacket, and carried only a small backpack. "I'm here to see Marcus Chun," she said in a soft but confident voice. "My name is Luna Reyes, and I can help him see again." Mrs. Hartwell's immediate instinct was to close the door. In the months since Marcus's accident, they had been contacted by dozens of charlatans, faith healers, and con artists claiming they could restore his sight. Most wanted money, some wanted publicity, and all of them preyed on the desperation of families dealing with permanent disabilities. But there was something different about this girl. She didn't have the polished presentation of a professional scammer or the wild-eyed fervor of a religious fanatic. She seemed genuinely sincere. "Mr. Chun isn't receiving visitors," Mrs. Hartwell said firmly. "If you have medical credentials or research you'd like to submit, you can contact his office." "I don't have credentials," Luna replied. "But I have something better. I have the gift." The word gift made Mrs. Hartwell's skepticism spike even higher. But before she could respond, Marcus's voice came from behind her. He had been making his way to the library when he heard the conversation at the front door. Something about the young woman's voice had caught his attention, a quality he couldn't quite identify, but that made him want to hear more. "What kind of gift?" Marcus asked, moving carefully down the hallway with his white cane. Mrs. Hartwell shot him a disapproving look, though he couldn't see it. "Mr. Chun, this is exactly the kind of person we've been avoiding. Please let me handle this." But Marcus was already at the door. He had become adept at reading voices since losing his sight, and something about Luna's tone suggested honesty rather than deception. He had heard enough lies and false promises to recognize the difference. "I can heal damaged tissue through touch," Luna said simply. "I know how that sounds, and I know you probably think I'm crazy or trying to scam you. But I'm not asking for money, and I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking for 5 minutes to prove what I can do." Marcus felt a familiar surge of hope mixed with frustration. He had been disappointed too many times to get excited about another miracle cure, but something about Luna's directness appealed to him. She wasn't making grand promises or demanding faith. She was offering proof. 5 minutes, he said, ignoring Mrs. Hartwell's sharp intake of breath. "But if this is some kind of scam or publicity stunt, I'll have you arrested." Luna nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see the gesture. "I understand. May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside to let her enter, and Mrs. Hartwell reluctantly closed the door behind them. Victoria was out shopping for wedding arrangements, so the mansion was quiet except for the sound of their footsteps on the marble floors as Marcus led Luna to the sitting room. The room was one of Victoria's favorites, decorated with antique furniture and expensive art that Marcus had once loved to admire. Now it served as a meeting space where he felt comfortable receiving the few visitors he still allowed. Luna sat across from him, and, even without sight, Marcus could sense her studying him carefully. "Before I try to help you," Luna said, "I need to tell you something about my gift. It doesn't work the way people expect. I can heal physical damage, but only if the person's spirit is ready to see the truth. Sometimes the things we discover when our sight returns are more painful than the blindness itself." The warning struck Marcus as odd. Most miracle healers he had encountered promised nothing but positive outcomes. They spoke of restored sight as an unqualified blessing, never acknowledging that there might be complications or unexpected consequences. "What do you mean by seeing the truth?" Marcus asked. Luna was quiet for a moment before answering. When people lose their sight, they often start noticing things they missed before. They hear conversations they weren't supposed to hear. They sense emotions that others try to hide. They become aware of deceptions that were happening right in front of them. Sometimes blindness is protection from knowledge that would be devastating. Mrs. Hartwell shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had worked with enough blind clients to know that Luna's observation was accurate. Many of her patients had discovered infidelities, financial deceptions, or family secrets during their period of visual impairment. But she had never heard anyone suggest that restored sight might be unwelcome. "I'm willing to take that risk," Marcus said. "I've been blind for 3 months, and I haven't heard or sensed anything that would make me prefer to stay this way." Luna's expression was sad, though Marcus couldn't see it. "Are you certain? Once I restore your sight, you can't unsee what you discover. There's no going back to the innocence of not knowing." The question annoyed Marcus. He had spent months dealing with people who thought they knew what was best for him, who wanted to protect him from taking risks or making his own decisions. He was tired of being treated like an invalid who couldn't handle the truth. "I'm certain," he said firmly. "I want to see again, whatever the consequences." Luna nodded and moved her chair closer to his. "I need to touch your face where the injury occurred. The healing process can be intense, and you might feel disoriented when your vision returns. Are you ready?" Marcus nodded, his heart racing with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He had been touched by dozens of doctors and specialists over the past months, all of them examining the damage that had stolen his sight. None of them had been able to offer anything more than sympathy and adaptive strategies. Luna placed her hands gently on either side of his face, her palms covering the areas where the concrete had struck him. Her hands were warm, almost hot, and Marcus immediately felt a tingling sensation that seemed to penetrate deep into his skull. The feeling was unlike anything he had experienced during medical examinations or treatments. "Close your eyes," Luna said softly. "This might feel strange." Marcus almost laughed at the irony of being told to close eyes that hadn't seen light in months, but he followed her instruction. The tingling sensation intensified, becoming a warm pulsing that seemed to spread throughout his entire head. He could feel something happening behind his eyelids, a sensation of movement or change that he couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Hartwell watched in amazement as a soft, warm light seemed to emanate from Luna's hands. The light was barely visible, like the glow of candles through frosted glass, but it was definitely there. She had been a practical woman all her life, skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained by science and medicine, but she couldn't deny what she was seeing. The healing process lasted about 10 minutes, though it felt much longer to Marcus. The sensations in his head grew stronger, sometimes almost uncomfortable, as if something was being rewired or rebuilt inside his skull. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, and he felt dizzy despite sitting still. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The tingling ceased, the warmth faded, and Luna removed her hands from his face. Marcus sat still for a moment, afraid to open his eyes, afraid that nothing would have changed. He had been disappointed too many times to allow himself to believe that this strange young woman had accomplished what the world's best doctors had declared impossible. "Open your eyes," Luna said gently. Marcus hesitated, then slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, there was nothing but the familiar darkness he had grown to know intimately. His heart sank with another crushing disappointment. But then, gradually, he became aware of shapes and shadows, of light filtering through the sitting room's tall windows. "I can see light," he whispered, not daring to believe it was real. "Give it a moment," Luna said. "Your brain needs time to remember how to process visual information." Slowly, Marcus's vision began to clear. First, he could make out the general shapes of furniture. Then, the outline of Mrs. Hartwell sitting across the room with her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Finally, his vision sharpened enough for him to see Luna clearly for the first time. She was even younger than she had sounded, probably no more than 22 or 23. Her hair was a rich dark brown that caught the morning light, and her eyes were indeed an unusual violet color that seemed almost luminous. But what struck Marcus most was the expression on her face. She looked sad, almost regretful, as if she had just done something that would cause him pain rather than joy. "My God," Marcus breathed, looking around the room with wonder. I can see. I can actually see." Mrs. Hartwell was crying, something Marcus had never seen her do in all their months together. She was a woman who prided herself on professional composure, but the miracle she had just witnessed had shaken her to her core. Marcus stood up carefully, still not entirely trusting his restored vision. Everything looked slightly different than he remembered. Colors seemed more vivid, and details appeared sharper. He walked to the window and looked out at the San Francisco skyline, at the city he had been building and developing for years but hadn't seen in months. "How is this possible?" he asked, turning back to Luna. "The doctors said the damage was irreversible. They said my optic nerves were completely severed." Luna stood as well, shouldering her backpack as if preparing to leave. "The gift doesn't follow medical rules. I can heal what doctors can't heal, but I can't explain how it works. I just know that it does." "Wait," Marcus said, suddenly, realizing that his miraculous healer was about to disappear as quickly as she had arrived. "I need to understand more. Where did you come from? How did you know about me? And what do you mean about seeing the truth?" Luna paused at the sitting room doorway, her expression growing even more sorrowful. "I came here because I was told you needed help. As for seeing the truth, you'll understand soon enough. When you do, remember that I warned you. Some knowledge is a burden rather than a gift." "Who told you I needed help?" Marcus pressed. "And why won't you accept payment for what you've done? You've given me my life back." "I don't need payment," Luna said. "And I didn't give you your life." Victoria Sterling stepped out of her white Mercedes convertible with the grace of someone who had been performing for cameras her entire life. Her platinum blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and her designer outfit was perfectly chosen for her morning of wedding shopping in Union Square. She was carrying several boutique bags and checking her phone as she walked toward the mansion's front entrance, completely unaware that everything in her carefully constructed world was about to change. Marcus watched her approach from the sitting room window, still marveling at his restored ability to see. For 3 months, he had only been able to imagine Victoria's face, to remember her beauty from photographs and his memories from before the accident. Now, seeing her again, he was struck by how stunning she truly was. But there was something different in her expression as she climbed the front steps, something he couldn't quite identify. "Victoria," Marcus called out as she entered the mansion, his voice filled with excitement and joy. "You're not going to believe what happened today." Victoria froze in the foyer, her shopping bags slipping from her hands and scattering across the marble floor. She was staring at Marcus as if she had seen a ghost, her face pale and her blue eyes wide with what looked like shock and terror rather than surprise and happiness. "Marcus," she said in a whisper, You can see me?" "I can see everything," Marcus said, moving toward her with careful but confident steps. "A young woman came here this morning, and somehow she healed my eyes. I know it sounds impossible, but look at me, Victoria. I can see your beautiful face again." Instead of running into his arms as he expected, Victoria took a step backward. Her expression was a mixture of emotions that Marcus couldn't quite read, but joy and relief were definitely not among them. She looked almost frightened. "How is that possible?" Victoria asked, her voice shaky. "The doctors said you would never see again. You were scheduled for that experimental surgery next week." Marcus noticed that she hadn't moved to embrace him or even to touch him. After months of her being his constant support and companion, her distant reaction to his miraculous recovery was puzzling. He had expected her to be overjoyed, to cry with happiness, to celebrate this impossible gift they had been given. Mrs. Hartwell appeared in the foyer behind Marcus, her face still showing traces of the emotional impact of witnessing the healing. "Miss Sterling," she said formally, "Mr. Chun has indeed had his sight restored. It was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen." Victoria's eyes darted between Marcus and Mrs. Hartwell, and Marcus caught a flash of something in her expression that looked almost like calculation. It was the kind of look he had seen on the faces of business adversaries when they were trying to figure out how to minimize unexpected setbacks. "This is wonderful," Victoria said, but her tone was flat, lacking the enthusiasm her words suggested. "I should call Dr. Santos and cancel your surgery appointment." "Already done," Marcus said, moving closer to her. "Victoria, what's wrong? You don't seem happy about this." Victoria forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course I'm happy. I'm just shocked. You have to understand, I've spent months accepting that you would never see again. It's overwhelming to suddenly have that change." The explanation made sense, but something in Victoria's demeanor continued to trouble Marcus. During his months of blindness, he had become acutely attuned to voices, to the subtle changes in tone that revealed true emotions. Victoria's voice carried an undercurrent of stress and anxiety that seemed disproportionate to the joyful surprise of his recovery. "Maybe you should sit down," Marcus suggested. "This is a lot to process for both of us." Victoria nodded and moved to one of the sitting room chairs, her movements stiff and mechanical. Marcus noticed that she chose a chair that put distance between them rather than the love seat where they usually sat together. He followed her into the room, his newly restored vision allowing him to observe details he hadn't been able to see in months. The first thing he noticed was how different Victoria looked. She was still beautiful, but there were changes that surprised him. She was thinner than he remembered, almost gaunt, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide. Her clothes, while expensive and stylish, seemed looser than they should be. Most puzzling was her nervous energy. She kept checking her phone and glancing toward the windows as if she expected someone to arrive. "Have you been feeling well?" Marcus asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You look like you've lost weight." Victoria's hand went unconsciously to her stomach. "I've just been stressed about the wedding planning and everything that's happened. It's been a difficult few months." Marcus sat down across from her, studying her face with his restored vision. He had always prided himself on reading people, on seeing through false presentations to understand true motivations. It was a skill that had served him well in business, allowing him to identify trustworthy partners and spot potential betrayals before they could damage his company. Looking at Victoria now, he saw things that disturbed him. Her eyes were avoiding direct contact with his, a behavior pattern he associated with deception. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she kept touching her neck, a nervous gesture he had never noticed before. Most concerning was the way she seemed to be mentally calculating something, as if his sudden recovery had created problems she needed to solve. "The wedding preparations have been that stressful?" Marcus asked gently. "Maybe we should postpone for a few months while I readjust to having my sight back." The relief that flashed across Victoria's face was so brief that Marcus almost missed it, but it was definitely there. For just a moment, her shoulders relaxed and her breathing became easier. Then, the tension returned, and she shook her head. "No, we should proceed as planned," she said quickly. "I've already made most of the arrangements. The venue is booked, the caterers are confirmed, and the invitations have been sent. It would be too complicated to postpone now." The practical nature of her response struck Marcus as odd. He would have expected her to be more concerned about whether he felt ready for such a major life event after experiencing a miraculous recovery. Instead, she seemed focused on logistics and complications, as if the wedding were a business merger rather than a celebration of their love. Marcus's phone rang, interrupting his troubled thoughts. It was David Kim, his business partner, calling with updates about several ongoing projects. Marcus explained his miraculous recovery, and David's reaction was everything Victoria's had not been. His friend was ecstatic, shouting with joy, and demanding to know every detail of what had happened. "This is incredible, Marcus," David said, his voice crackling with excitement through the phone's speaker. "Do you realize what this means? You can come back to work. You can oversee the projects personally again. The Meridian Tower project has been waiting for your final approval on the penthouse designs." As Marcus talked to David about business matters, he noticed Victoria's behavior becoming even more strange. She was actively listening to his side of the conversation, her attention focused and intense in a way that seemed unusual. When David mentioned specific project names and dollar amounts, Victoria's expression changed subtly, becoming more alert and engaged. After Marcus ended the call, Victoria immediately asked about the conversation. "David sounded excited about you returning to work. Are you planning to jump right back into managing the company?" "Gradually," Marcus replied. "I'll need some time to readjust, but yes, I want to be hands-on with the business again." "Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure you don't push yourself too hard too fast," Victoria said, but her tone suggested she was thinking about something else entirely. That evening, Victoria seemed unusually tired and excused herself early to go to bed. She claimed she had a headache and needed rest, leaving Marcus alone in the sitting room with his thoughts. For the first time since his recovery, he was beginning to understand what Luna had meant about the price of sight. During his months of blindness, Marcus had become accustomed to Victoria's schedules and routines. She usually stayed up late reading or watching television, often falling asleep on the couch next to him. Her early retreat to bed was out of character, as was her general behavior throughout the day. Unable to sleep himself, Marcus decided to walk around the mansion grounds. The Sterling estate included several acres of landscaped gardens, and he wanted to experience the joy of seeing his surroundings again. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the pathways, and Marcus found himself walking toward the small guest cottage that sat at back. "I returned your sight, but what you do with it is up to you. Just remember that the truth has a price, and sometimes that price is the loss of everything you thought you knew about the people you love." Before Marcus could ask any more questions, Luna was gone, walking quickly toward the front door with Mrs. Hartwell hurrying after her. Marcus followed, his newly restored vision still adjusting to movement and changing light levels. By the time he reached the front door, Luna was already walking down the street, her small figure disappearing into the morning fog. Marcus stood on the front steps of the mansion, looking around at the world he had feared he would never see again. The Pacific Heights neighborhood looked exactly as he remembered it, with its elegant Victorian houses and perfectly manicured gardens. Everything was familiar, yet somehow different, as if his blindness had changed not just his vision, but his perspective on the world around him. Mrs. Hartwell touched his arm gently. "Mr. Chun, we should call Dr. Santos and cancel your surgery appointment. And perhaps we should have you examined by an ophthalmologist to document what's happened." Marcus nodded, still overwhelmed by the miracle he had experienced. But Luna's cryptic warnings about truth and knowledge weighed on his mind. He couldn't imagine what she had meant. His life had been an open book, his relationships built on honesty and trust. What possible truth could be so devastating that she had seemed reluctant to restore his sight? As he looked around at the world he could see again, Marcus had no idea that his questions would soon be answered in ways he could never have imagined. The sight that Luna had restored to him would indeed reveal truths that had been hidden in plain view, truths that would shake the foundation of everything he believed about his life, his love, and his future. Victoria's car was pulling into the driveway just as Marcus and Mrs. Hartwell went back inside. His fiancée would be the first person to learn about his miraculous recovery, and her reaction would be the beginning of his education about the price of sight that Luna had tried to warn him about. Marcus flew to Los Angeles the following week, accompanied by Mrs. Hartwell, who had insisted on coming despite his protests that he could manage alone. Dr. Santos was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s whose office was filled with complex diagrams of the human eye and brain. She examined Marcus thoroughly, reviewed his medical records, and explained her research in terms he could understand. "Mr. Chun," she said after completing her examination, "I won't give you false hope. Your case is among the most severe I've encountered. However, there are aspects of your injury that make you a candidate for our experimental protocol. The damage to your optic nerves is complete, but the visual cortex of your brain appears to be intact. If we could somehow bypass the damaged nerves and stimulate the brain directly, there might be a possibility of restoring some visual function. The procedure she described was complex and risky. It would involve implanting electrodes directly into his brain, connected to cameras that would capture visual information and translate it into electrical signals. The technology was still in its infancy, and the best-case scenario would be the restoration of very basic vision, perhaps the ability to distinguish light from dark or detect large objects. Marcus was ready to sign up immediately, but Dr. Santos cautioned him to take time to consider the risks. The surgery would require opening his skull and implanting foreign objects directly into his brain. There was a risk of infection, stroke, or death. Even if the surgery was successful, there was no guarantee that his brain would be able to interpret the artificial signals as vision. He returned to San Francisco with more hope than he had felt since the accident, but also with a heavy decision to make. Victoria was horrified when he explained the procedure to her. She begged him to reconsider, arguing that the risks were too great and that he was allowing desperation to cloud his judgment. Her concern touched him, but it also strengthened his resolve. He had spent 3 months learning to accept limitations, and he was ready to take any chance, no matter how small, to reclaim his independence. The decision to proceed with Dr. Santos's experimental treatment would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. As Marcus prepared for what might be his last hope for restored vision, he had no idea that his blindness had been a blessing in disguise, protecting him from a truth that would have destroyed him long before any accident could have taken his sight.